Hello, everybody. Be very welcome to our webinar. The live streaming will take place in two separate transmissions, one in English and another in Portuguese. Please select the desired option and the original transmission will be in English. We are very happy to have this debate tonight about Stop Hate for Profit, a campaign that was launched in the United States, led by ADL, the NAACP, and other civil society organizations. We have the pleasure of having with us and the honor of having Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of ADL, Djamila Ribeiro, Master in Philosophy, and Patrícia Campos Mello, a distinguished journalist. There are three institutions which are promoting this event tonight. Conib, the Confederação Israelita do Brasil, Brazilian Jewish Confederation, is the umbrella organization of the Brazilian Jewish community. Established in 1948, it leads and politically represents the Brazilian Jewish community vis-a-vis the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branches, as well as to universities and other civil society organizations, Jewish communities, and organizations throughout the world. It keeps a permanent dialogue with the above-mentioned public and private institutions and participates in forums and debates. Founded in 2016, the IB, Instituto Brasil-Israel, has as its goal to address the complexity of issues involving the State of Israel and the Middle East in Brazil. Towards that end, it works as a platform vis-a-vis universities, the press, and the social media, organizing courses, seminars, lectures, debates, and trips to Israel and the Palestinian territories for young people and opinion makers. IB stands for peace between the peoples in the Middle East, opposing all forms of discrimination in accordance with democratic values. Along these lines, IB's priority is to build bridges through an open dialogue with groups within the Brazilian society that share the same values. The ADL was founded in 1913 in response to an escalating climate of anti-Semitism and bigotry. It is a leading anti-hate organization. Its timeless mission is to protect the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. Today, it continues to fight all forms of hate. ADL is a global leader in exposing extremism and delivering anti-bias education. Its ultimate goal is a world in which no group or individual suffers from bias, discrimination, or hate. As our speakers, we have tonight Jonathan Greenblatt, who, as I mentioned, is the CEO of ADL, and in this job, Jonathan leads all aspects of the world's leading anti-hate organization. Prior to ADL, Jonathan served in the White House as a special assistant to President Obama and director of the Office of Social Innovation. He assumed this role after a long career in business. In 2009, Jonathan founded All for Good, AFG, the largest database of volunteer opportunities on the internet. Incubated at Google, AFG has developed an innovative strategy for organizing the world's volunteers lists. Djamila Ribeiro has a master's degree in political philosophy, is the coordinator of the Plural Feminism collection, and author of the book, What is a Place of Speech? She also wrote Who's Afraid of Black Feminism and Small Anti-Racist Manual. Founder of the seal Sueli Carneiro, she has given lectures at important universities around the world, including Harvard and Oxford. She also signs a column for the magazine El Brasil and Folha de São Paulo. Patrícia Campos Mello has a degree in journalism from USP and a master's degree in business and economic reporting from NYU. She was a Washington Bureau correspondent for newspaper O Estado de São Paulo and is currently a special reporter and columnist for Folha de São Paulo. She is the author of Honeymoon in Cobain and The Hatred Machine, both published by Companhia das Letras. She has received several awards, such as the King of Spain Digital Journalism Award in 2018 and the International Press Freedom Award, granted in 2019 by the Committee for the Protection of Journalists. I am Fernando Lottenberg. I have a bachelor's degree from the Law School of University of São Paulo, a master's degree in philosophy and general theory of law, and a PhD in international public law. I was a Fulbright Fellow at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs in Austin, Texas. Currently, I am the president of Conib, vice president of the World Jewish Congress, chairman of the Memorial Foundation for Jewish Culture, and a member of the Board of International Relations for the São Paulo State Government. We will start with an introduction by each of the participants. Each of you will have 3 to 5 minutes. And please, Jonathan, the floor is yours to start.
Well, thank you so much, Fernando. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with yourself, Djamila, Patricia, to talk about these issues of hate and harassment, in particular, what we see happening on the internet. And I know that my fellow panelists have experienced the kind of targeted campaigns and victimization that I think, unfortunately, is a large segment of our audience can relate to. Because while there's so much good that's come from social media, it's changed how we shop, how we socialize, right? How we spend our time. It's also become a cesspool of bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, and hate. You know, at the ADL, we've been fighting anti-Semitism and all forms of intolerance for over 100 years, focusing on not just stopping the defamation of the Jewish people, but securing justice and fair treatment to all people. My predecessors marched in the civil rights movement in the American South in the 1950s and 60s. My predecessors fought for LGBTQ equality in the United States, fought for to stop violence against women and other forms of toxic misogyny. My predecessors have fought anti-Muslim bias, make America and the world a more tolerant place for people, regardless of how they pray. But today, the fight against hate, the front line is really Facebook. Indeed, we've seen trends about hate and harassment online that are far worse than anything we could have ever imagined. So at the ADL, we opened a center in Silicon Valley in 2017. We were the first American civil rights group, certainly the first Jewish communal organization with a presence right there. And we put this Center for Technology and Society in the middle, in the hotbed of innovation, because in order to fight the hate, we've got to engage with companies. And the person who runs our shop there in Silicon Valley, he himself is a veteran of the industry, a software engineer by training. And our style, our focus on how can we engage with the companies. Twitter, Google, Facebook, Reddit, Amazon. So many of these companies have built robust platforms. And we feel we need to engage them with the kind of innovation that's actually making an impact. And so the ADL #1, our first approach is partnerships. We're working directly with YouTube to mitigate the effect of hateful videos on that platform. We're working with Reddit to monitor the incidences of hate on their system as they share data with us. With Google, we have a partnership using artificial intelligence and machine learning to interrupt harassment before it happens. Because at ADL, we have the best data sets on this in the world. So we try to engage with industry, #1. #2, we do research and development. We have computer scientists, we have data scientists, software engineers, and other experts on staff at ADL who are doing cutting edge research projects to understand, again, how can machine learning adapt to data sets about online hate? What are the new trends in gaming, and how do we need to be aware of how these multiplayer gaming environments can actually foster harassment? We're looking at implicit bias in software. Lots of very interesting topics. And thirdly, we're also looking at policy. Is there a role for the government? Does the government need to actually come in and regulate this industry to a degree? And all of this has really come to a head in terms of our engagement with Facebook. Look, Facebook is the largest social media platform on the planet. In their last earnings report, Mark Zuckerberg shared that more than 3 billion users worldwide use Facebook and its different products. And the company is less than 16 years old. Last year, it earned $70 billion in revenue. And yet our studies show that if you try to understand where online hate and harassment happens, it happens more frequently on Facebook than any other social media service. That's why with a few other nonprofits, including the NAACP, Common Sense Media, the League of United Latin American Citizens, we launched Stop Hate for Profit last month. And I'm super excited in the question and answers, Fernando, to talk more about Stop Hate for Profit, how it's organized, what it achieved, and where we go from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It was very clarifying, your introduction. I would like now to ask Djamila to have her first statement with us.
Well, good evening to all. Thank you so much for this invitation. It's very important to have this kind of discussion in Brazil for the Brazilian audience, because here in Brazil, Black women are the central targets of hate speech on social media, especially in Twitter. But first of all, I'd like to display my condolences to this young girl, this child here in Brazil who had experienced a very brutal violence. She is 10 years old, and she was raped by her uncle, and she got pregnant, and she had the right to do the legal abortion. And yesterday, or a couple days ago, a very conservative person, exposed her name, the address of the hospital that this young girl was, and fanatic people, conservative people, went to the front, in the front of the hospital to commit another violence against this girl. And it's very important to say that these people went to the hospital because a person exposed the name of this girl in a social media. And just today, I think, the social media canceled the profile of this woman. But I think it's very important to this discussion tonight to address how social media can contribute to this kind of thing. And even with a lot of denounces, people were denounced the post, but the video was there, and just yesterday that they canceled the profile of this woman who exposed a child who was living a brutal situation. So in Brazil, I think it's a very important discussion. According to the PhD in sociology, Luiz Valério Trindade, on Twitter, 81% of the hate speech are aimed at Black women. According to this PhD, this is due to the rise of the role of Black women in Brazil. Brazil was one of the last countries in the world to abolish slavery, so it's obviously how there are strong colonial roots in this country. I have been attacked several times on social media, especially on Twitter. And in the last time that I was attacked, my daughter received a threatness in her phone. I think it's very important to say that here in Brazil, we are under Bolsonaro administration, and you know the role of the extreme right in Brazil. Unfortunately, we are living in a very difficult situation, but as a Black feminist, as a person who challenged different kind of oppression. In Brazil, we are attacked by conservative people, but sometimes as well as from people who say that they want to change the world or that they want to change the society, but they don't know how to disagree without attacking, expose. And we know that how it creates a lot of problems in our real life. There are a lot of Black women that gave up, that we have to talk about the psychological damage of this kind of attacks, and how in Brazil it's very difficult sometimes to have a debate when you are a Black woman, when you are challenged the place that were imposed to us in Brazil. I had, for the first time in my life, to go to a police station to report a crime because my daughter was threatened. And for me, it's very, it's an absurd that this kind of things happens because people do not have responsibility. But given that this reality, I think it's important to not to suit individuals. I think it's important to respond to talk about the responsibility of these platforms. So me with another 3 organizations of the Black movement, we decided to represent Twitter in court because we understand that our thesis, based on the thinking of the Brazilian jurist Adilson Moreira, is the economic exploitation of racism and misogyny. So we decided to represent Twitter here in Brazil because they needed to improve their policies, for sure. They needed to take responsibility because they are, we cannot accept that these billionaire companies keep earning money through our oppression. But we know that you have a civil landmark, internet landmark here in Brazil, but we understand that we need to change that because we have to sue the platform. And as Black women are the target of this hate, we have to understand our economic reality. Most of the Black women cannot hire a lawyer or can suit a billionaire company. So we understand that it's necessary to do this discussion, but to make these platforms take responsibility for this kind of hate speech that unfortunately aimed Black women in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Djamila. I think we are already finding some common ground here with different perspectives and with different instruments, but facing this reality of the power of these social networks. Please, Patrícia, would like to share with us your first thoughts?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor to share this webinar with you, Fernando, with you, Jonathan, and with you, Djamila. I'm going to speak from the point of view of a journalist in Brazil, but that applies to several other nations. We know that social media has been weaponized, and it's now used as a means to silence opposition politicians, the media, and members of minorities, such as Black women, mainly. We have been witnessing the increasing aggressiveness of the virtual lynching campaigns, as we call them in Brazil. This has been used not only by the Brazilian government, but by several populist governments around the world, that we call them the digital populists, because they know how to use social media in a very efficient way. So on the one hand, they are flooding social media with the narratives they want to convey. So they're, and mainly disinformation, right? They're flooding the social media from all points, be it WhatsApp or Twitter or Facebook, with just the versions they want to prevail. And that includes spreading a lot of disinformation. And on the other hand, for this strategy to work, you have to discredit and delegitimize the media and the opposition politicians. That's the way you're going to eliminate any filter, any checks and balances in terms of this attempt for an authoritarian government. So in Brazil, we have been, women journalists have been really targeted by politicians, and this is, we call it the hate machine. It's not only one politician or the other. It's like an ecosystem of extreme right blogs, extreme right internet influencers, extreme right politicians, and even a cabinet linked directly to the Brazilian government. So they use this, let's say, hate machine for two purposes. One of them is to try to intimidate specific journalists and specific media outlets who have been critical towards the government or who have been investigating. And on the other hand, they use this to divert the attention from negative news. For instance, I'm going to give you an example. The federal government, since the end of April, they're not publishing the actual numbers of people who died because of COVID-19. In their social media accounts, they only publish people who survived. So if you're a person that are only getting your information from the government social media and from extreme right blogs or influencers, you don't know actually what is the dimension of the humanitarian tragedy that we are living in Brazil and in the US for that matter. So these two things, trying to intimidate specific journalists, specific opposition leaders, specific activists online, and trying to flood social media with only positive news or disinformation, these are the two main parts of this communication strategy that is being used in Brazil and in several other countries right now, in the US, in the Philippines by Rodrigo Duterte, in Hungary by Viktor Orban. It's the same way all over the world. It's a new generation. And this attempt to intimidate journalists, it does work as sort of a new form of censorship. Just like the democracies don't die like they used to die 20 years ago with the classic military coup, you have the erosion of democracy within the democratic system and with elected officials. Also, censorship has changed. So now you no longer have a person in a newsroom saying, okay, so you cannot publish this and you have to publish that. You're just going to flood social media with whatever message you want to convey. And at the same time, you're going to start attacking mainly women journalists, trying to intimidate those voices. Whenever we are attacked online, it's usually not a criticism, like constructive criticism, saying, okay, so your story is horrible, there's a mistake. We have to have this kind of criticism and we need to correct our mistakes. But the kind of attacks that women journalists and women politicians and activists are suffering online, it's always a misogynistic connotation. It's always, they're going to criticize our appearance, they're going to say you're old, or you're fat, and they're going to talk about your family, and they're going to say that they're offering sex in exchange for something. So this has become very systematic in Brazil, these intimidation campaigns, and I am just one person who have experienced this, but several others have, such as Djamila, who just mentioned it. And I think there's somehow the internet platforms have to be accountable for this. In some way, I understand that they don't want to be considered publishers, but only, distributors of content, right? I mean, this is the heart of the problem, that you don't want to make them liable to other people's speech or content. But at this time, the way that disinformation and intimidation campaigns are so widespread on social media, there has to be some sort of accountability. be it with regulation or with campaigns such as Stop Hate for Profit that put economic pressure on these big tech companies. Well, this is part of what I would like to say, and I can continue speaking when you have more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia. We'd like to pass now to our second phase. I'll be asking questions to each one of you, and I'll start with our international guest, Jonathan. Can you tell us about how did the Stop Hate for Profit movement start? Who are the main actors in this campaign? Which were the first companies to support and join the movement? And is that movement somehow influenced by the current political climate in the American society? For instance, we are on the eve of an electoral process. We'd like to know for you how you joined with an ACP, Color of Change movements to put them together in this fight.
So there are a few things. Thank you for the question, Fernando. And I just want to say how much I admire the courage of Patricia and Djamila, your daughter. To hear what you've experienced, I think, is really humbling, a little scary. To see your courage is inspiring. So it's really, I'm proud to share this platform with you tonight. So Stop Hate for Profit was born out of the frustration of ADL and some other nonprofits because we don't feel Facebook has taken enough action, decisive enough, swiftly enough to deal with hate on the platform. They really haven't applied, the kind of innovation and talent and resources to deal with hate in the way they've used it to micro-target users, in the way they've used it to build a sophisticated advertising platform in the history of business. If they applied just some of that energy to this problem, it would have been solved already. And we were inspired to create this after the murder of George Floyd, the lynching of George Floyd in America. He was a black man who was killed by the police, a really grotesque crime. And after that, it spawned a series of demonstrations in the United States, in big cities across the country, particularly Minneapolis, where he was killed. And yet we saw on Facebook white supremacists and violent extremists coordinating in broad daylight how they were going to subvert the peaceful protests. They're going to try to cause mayhem and violence on the streets, disguised as protesters. So this prompted us to reach out to Facebook to point out this group. I mean, at ADL, we're tracking the extremists. We've been doing it for a long time. We brought this to their attention. They didn't move quickly, and we finally said enough, if you will, or Dayenu. And so we reached out to the NAACP and Color of Change, nonprofits that represent the African American and Black community. We reached out to the National Hispanic Media Center and the League of United Latin American Citizens, which are run by, which are focused on protecting Hispanic or Latinx citizens, including those of Brazilian descent or ethnicity. We reached out to Common Sense Media, which focuses on child advocacy, as well as a group called Free Press and Mozilla, which are focused specifically on sort of online activism and free press. And together we formed this coalition, Stop Hate for Profit. And we initially called on advertisers and we said, pause your advertising on Facebook for 30 days. That's it. Very simple ask. And we made it simple and straightforward, Fernando, because we wanted to make it easy for companies to get on board. And we basically said, your ad dollars today on Facebook are subsidizing hate. And we gave them examples of their ads on Facebook published alongside anti-Semitic content, racist memes, horrible conspiracy theories, and so on. And we said basically take 30 days off of the spend. When we started the campaign, we hadn't have a single company lined up. But to your question, shortly after we announced, some companies that are pretty well known in the United States, like North Face, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Magnolia Pictures, all started to come on board. And then the big one that dropped was Unilever. And then Verizon. and then the floodgates open. At the end of the day, we started with not a single business on the, participating. 3 weeks later, we had over 1,000 companies. Some of the most iconic American brands: Disney, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Microsoft, Levi's, Hershey's, Ford. I could go on. And as well, many global brands. I mentioned Unilever, Diageo, Heineken, Honda, VW, Adidas, and many others. We also had over 100 nonprofits sign up. We also had tens of thousands of individual users sign up. And at the end of the day, and I can talk more about it in the additional Q&A, Facebook made some important changes because of the Stop Hate for Profit campaign.
Thank you. Djamila, eu acho que você podia contar um pouco para quem não conhece como acontece a articulação dos movimentos negros no Brasil. Quem são os principais atores, como a comunidade negra se organiza em temas como ancestralidade, cultura, identidade, ou seja, quem defende o negro no Brasil? Conta para quem não conhece.
Bom, existem várias organizações do movimento negro. É importante sempre ressaltar o trabalho histórico dos movimentos negros no Brasil, uma vez que estamos falando de um país que foi um dos últimos do mundo a abolir a escravidão e que depois criou toda uma ideia romântica do não conflito racial no Brasil, que a gente chama do mito da democracia racial. Então, os movimentos negros fizeram um trabalho fundamental para que hoje no Brasil a população negra se reconhecesse como negra. Se hoje nos reconhecemos como um país de maioria negra por conta desse trabalho histórico dos movimentos negros, mas temos várias organizações atuando desde pensando políticas públicas, fazendo a discussão da segurança pública. O Brasil é um dos países mais violentos para com a população negra, sobretudo em relação à violência policial, quando falamos de homens negros, e em relação às mulheres negras, sobretudo na questão da saúde, da falta de políticas públicas. Então, acho importante entender esses trabalhos, combater essa visão, né, de um país passivo, de um país que não tem uma militância. Importante também falar dos trabalhos das comunidades de terreiro, das religiões de matriz africana, que historicamente vem fazendo um papel fundamental no Brasil. Importante dizer que essas religiões também sob ataque, infelizmente, sobretudo agora, durante o governo Bolsonaro, vários terreiros sendo atacados, sendo apedrejados, destruídos. Então, são trabalhos em várias frentes, sem dúvida nenhuma, com várias organizações. Atualmente temos coalizões negras formadas, sobretudo pautando essa questão da criminalização das periferias, da política de drogas no Brasil, e as organizações feministas negras fazendo esse trabalho fundamental de trabalhar pela perspectiva sempre interseccional de raça, classe e gênero, num país em que, infelizmente, a população negra é a que mais sofre com a violação de direitos humanos.
Tá ótimo, muito obrigado. Vamos passar para a Patrícia agora. Vamos voltar para o inglês. Patrícia, what does character assassination mean? And I'd like you to develop a little on that, and based on your experience, what would be the importance of having a code of ethics to self-regulate the circulation of information and knowledge in the social media? For instance, do you believe that our Marco Civil da Internet, the civil rights framework for the Internet, the current Brazilian legislation, is enough to answer those current challenges of fake news and hate speech? And since you have an international experience, what have you seen in other parts of the world that could be a good example for us?
Thank you. So, should I answer in English?
Yes, please.
Or Portuguese? Okay, cool. I'm going to start by the second part. The one thing just like Section 230 in the US, our Marco Civil da Internet was elaborated, was created in a different era for internet platforms. So at that time, it was essential that you did not have liability for internet platforms for content generated by other people, by their users, right? So this was essential for internet to grow and for social media to grow at that time. But right now, I think several specialists are trying to rethink this model, because by absolutely removing any kind of accountability or responsibility from the internet platforms, you give wrong incentives for them. You know, you only have the incentive for engagement, whatever the content is. If it generates engagement, okay, it generates profits. So at this point of development of social media platforms, we should rethink the reason behind Section 230 and Marco Civil da Internet, which basically allowed platforms to grow and to prosper, but at this time they're giving really perverse incentives for these companies. I do think that self-regulation is important. This is being done in Germany, for instance, and our bill that is being, it's now in the House, in Congress, our bill does incorporate part of the German legislation, which is very much geared towards hate speech and this self-regulation instance. But I don't think that's going to be enough. I think there's no silver bullet legislation or self-regulation. I think it has to be a combination of self-regulation, economic pressure, such as Stop Hate for Profit, and legislation. I mean, all of those combined to have some sort of, now it's just no man's land, right? I mean, there's no accountability. You can just, and mainly for professional rings of disinformation, networks of disinformation, people who finance disinformation. These people we have to do the follow the money thing. These people have to be held accountable. The people who are doing this professionally. So the first part of the question, what's character assassination? I think I'm going to give you an example. What they did with Felipe Neto 3 weeks ago, it's the classic example of a character assassination attempt. In, I don't know, like a few hours, they flooded all social media with fake messages that he would be appearing to be a pedophile. So, and
he's an important YouTuber in Brazil, just for Jonathan to be aware.
Yes, he's really big. He has over 30 million followers, his YouTube channel. And he did a video for the New York Times, very critical towards the government's management of the sanitary crisis in Brazil. And a week after that, there came this very public online harassment thing and fake news campaign to basically say that he was a pedophile. Or another example, the Justice Minister, our former Justice Minister, Sérgio Moro, once he left the government with a lot of criticism and sort of pointing out that he feared there was an attempt to interfere with the federal police, he was transformed in a communist traitor in like 2 days. He was, and this is really fast because this is done in a professional way. You have networks that are financing this massive operation of character assassination. This has happened with several journalists as well. Vera Magalhães has been a target. Miriam Leitão has been a target. Several activists and Black activists, several of them. I was a target. In a few hours, I was getting all kinds of pornographic memes and rape threats and all kinds of things in my mailbox. And unfortunately, this is going to be there forever. So if anyone, searches Google, they're going to find memes, porn videos with montages with my face on it. And there's no going back on that. So someone has to be accountable for that. since there's no, you can't erase that. This is going to be there forever. So just to say, the ultimate goal of the character assassination campaigns is to intimidate and silence voices. And I fear that it is effective because not just me, but several journalists and activists, we are really pausing before we do investigative reporting because we're thinking, okay, so who are they going to attack now? They're going to get a picture of my mother and do a montage of the porn meme. So, yes, this is what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to share with you that we at Conib are participating very closely in this new bill at the House. I was in a session 2 weeks ago about hate speech, and the Secretary of Conib, Dr. Ronnie Weinzoff, was in the penultimate meeting about these mechanisms of punishing and what people call here regulated self-regulation, which tries to combine one thing and another. And so, since we're talking about hate speech, I'd like to ask Jonathan to share with us your understanding of this expression. What does hate speech mean in the American context? And since we know that ADL is an important player monitoring anti-Semitism, how do you see this growing trend of anti-Semitism throughout the world in these last years?
Well, thank you for the question, Fernando. I appreciate it. And I think it's a good question. What is hate speech? Because it can be different in different contexts. Let's be clear, however, making fake videos of people or memes of people with the intent to defame and degrade them, that is not speech. Okay? That is not what in the United States our founding fathers had in mind when they drafted the First Amendment. That is not what constitutional scholars had in mind when they talked about these liberties that were granted. It is inexcusable and it is intolerable. And I would say the following. There's a reason why in newspapers, on television, on radio, you don't see this type of vile toxin spread. It is because it is not within the bounds of reasonable conversation. I believe that when we can talk about policy and laws, the United States, as Patricia mentioned, our Section 230 is a law that relieves the companies from any liability. But the reason why you don't see this in the United States, in our newspapers or our television networks, or our coming from our movie studios or radio stations or outdoor billboards, is because there is a difference between freedom of speech, between speech and slander. There's a difference between ideas and incitement. Okay? There's a difference. Clear as a bell. And so I think we've got to recognize that there are some sort of moral relativists who would tell you, no, it's free speech, it's not. In the United States, there's a trend toward cancel culture. I don't believe in it. There's a trend toward safe spaces. I don't believe in it. I don't think we need safe spaces. I think we need brave places to have hard conversations. But there is a clear difference between hard conversations and hate. There's a clear difference between delineating what is a novel or provocative idea and defaming people's character, committing character assassination, threatening people, or creating the conditions in which they can be threatened. So look, I don't know. I think Patricia and Djamila, I'm not sure if you are lawyers or not. I'm not a lawyer. So I don't come to this conversation like a constitutional scholar, but I come to, I think, with some common sense. And at the ADL, we would say, yes, we need to tolerate hard speech, but we don't need to tolerate harmful speech. When you intend to cause harm to a person because of their race, because of their gender, because of their religion, their national origin, their level of ability, their sexual orientation, or maybe even their political ideas. So I will, the ADL has been fighting on this front for over 100 years, defending our constitutions and the liberties enshrined in it. But I draw a line at defamation, period. And there are some who will hide behind, oh, no, it's free speech. That isn't. In the United States, you can't cry fire in a crowded theater. In the United States, you can't libel someone by spreading false and malicious information. And you should not be able to do that online. And I'll make one last point. Why this work matters so much. The companies we're talking about, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and so on and so forth. These are some of the most innovative companies, not just of our time, but of all time. These are companies with a kind of resources and competitive position, which is extraordinary. And all we would ask, all we would submit respectfully, is they commit some of those resources, commit a fraction of that innovative capability and direct it toward tackling this problem once and for all. Please don't tell me that it can't be solved. Please don't tell me that companies like Facebook, which are now large, there are more members of Facebook than there are adherents of Christianity. Please don't tell me that Facebook, which spans culture and geography, language and faith, please don't tell me that Facebook can't take down the kind of content that threatens Patricia. Please don't tell me that Google can't remove from search the kind of content we're talking about. Please don't tell me that Twitter can't take off the kind of content that's harmed Djamila and her family. And please don't insult my intelligence by making that claim. I won't stand for it.
Thank you. And regarding anti-Semitism, could you give us your impressions about this last trend?
Look, I think anti-Semitism is troubling on many fronts. In the United States, we've been tracking, this issue has been around, it's a persistent part of the human condition. For thousands of years, Jews have been victimized. They have been stereotyped, in large part because they were minorities in majority countries where they pray differently, and that allowed them, they were easy victims of persecution. They were identifiable class of people who could be marginalized. And when things went wrong in ancient Rome, in medieval Europe, in Tsarist Russia, in Nazi Germany, in the Soviet Union, in Chavez's Venezuela, you could point to the Jews and blame it, or in the Arab Middle East, you could blame it on the Jews. We were always a convenient scapegoat and stereotype. At ADL, we've been tracking anti-Semitic incidents in the US for 40 years. And what I'm sad to say is that in recent years, after a long decline, anti-Semitism has spiked. Last year, we tracked more incidents in America than any time since the 1970s. Harassment, vandalism, and violence. And, the thing about anti-Semitism we need to remember, anti-Semitism or a hatred of the Jewish people, it is not a Jewish problem. Of course it is on some level, it's an immediate threat to Jewish people, but anti-Semitism historically is a harbinger of much worse. It is the canary in the coal mine. It is like a flare that tells you that the onslaught is coming. And so what's worrisome about the spate of anti-Semitism we've seen in recent years, Fernando, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or in other parts of the world, is it almost always augurs something much more frightening. Now, again, anti-Semitism alone is terrifying. But whether it's people claiming, making attacks on the Jewish people or attacks on the Jewish state, demonizing Jews, delegitimizing the Jewish people, holding us to double standards. Again, it starts with us, but it is a symptom of a sick society that will consume itself. So I would say to you today, we've seen a troubling rise. Social media has allowed this to expand exponentially. And if we don't wrestle this under control, again, it's not just a Jewish problem, it will be all of society's problem.
Thank you. Djamila, Você mencionou na sua fala inicial o professor Adilson Moreira, né, que no livro Pensando como Negro fez uma pesquisa sobre decisões judiciais ligando casos de racismo, injúria racial, e ele detectou um padrão, né, ou seja, juízes que decidem esses processos, eles veem, às vezes, muitas vezes, ou quase sempre, o racismo como um comportamento individual e não como algo estrutural, né? Como você acha que seria possível levar isso para a justiça brasileira no sentido de considerar essas questões desse racismo intergeracional, institucional, além dos aspectos simplesmente legais ou formais que fazem parte das decisões judiciais que nós temos por aqui?
Adilson Moreira é um brilhante jurista que vem fazendo um debate fundamental sobre direito antidiscriminatório. E o Brasil, justamente quando eu falei, né, na fala anterior sobre a questão da negação do racismo, dificultou muito uma consciência sobre a questão racial no Brasil. De pensar o racismo como uma estrutura, que estrutura todas as relações sociais, e não meramente a questão do repúdio quando pessoas são agredidas. Claro que a gente tem que repudiar, mas entender os efeitos do racismo como uma estrutura, que a gente está no país de maioria negra e ter pouquíssimas pessoas negras ocupando lugares de destaque, entender quanto fomos alijados historicamente de oportunidades, o quanto que o processo de pós-abolição no Brasil, em que não tivemos políticas de reparação, não existiram, de fato, a inclusão da população negra no Brasil, faz com que a gente ainda seja a maioria nas periferias, nas favelas, mulheres negras ainda não sejam a maioria no emprego doméstico. Então, é fundamental que a gente entenda essa realidade, rompa com essa visão romântica do Brasil, de um país que encarcera em massa a população negra, e que a justiça, obviamente, não foi feita para atender os nossos direitos. Entender as formulações das teorias racistas biologizantes do século XIX, que não só foram teorias, mas também como teorias que organizaram a nossa sociedade. Então, é necessário no Brasil a gente fazer um debate sério sobre a origem social das desigualdades e entender o quanto que o racismo é essa estrutura que promove essas desigualdades. E justamente por isso, levando em consideração a estrutura racista, que nós estamos movendo essa representação contra o Twitter e não contra indivíduos em si, porque é nessa rede social que essas pessoas se sentem à vontade para cometer esse tipo de ataques, não só o Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google, né? YouTube, Google, mesma empresa, mas como no Brasil essas questões acontecem muito mais no Twitter, é justamente por isso que nós estamos representando a empresa e não indivíduos, porque a gente entende que ela faz parte dessa estrutura aqui no Brasil, Twitter Brasil, e que acaba explorando economicamente todos esses ataques. E nós somos atacadas, a grande maioria de mulheres negras, por conta que vivemos numa sociedade estruturalmente racista, estruturalmente machista, que nos confina a determinados lugares e se incomoda quando nós não estamos nesses lugares que são os lugares esperados. E justamente por isso que o Adilson Moreira é o advogado que encabeça essa representação, juntamente com o Jefferson Amadeus e o Pauliotti. E é importante dizer que não só sou eu representando o Twitter, também são mais 3 organizações do movimento negro, a União de Negros e Negras de São Paulo, a CONAC, a Coordenação Nacional das Comunidades Rurais Negras Quilombolas, e a AMAIM, que é a Organização de Mulheres Negras da Bahia, porque a gente entende que essa naturalização dessas violências no Brasil, racismo estrutural, aliada a essa ideia romântica de democracia racial, leva a uma naturalização dessas violências nas redes sociais. O Brasil é um país que naturalizou o racismo. O Adilson Moreira também é autor de um outro livro brilhante chamado Racismo Recreativo, em que ele vai defender essa ideia de o quanto que o racismo ele é utilizado para reforçar estereótipos, manter a imagem negativa das pessoas negras, mas também para provocar o riso quanto que humoristas no Brasil ganharam dinheiro durante muitos anos, explorando economicamente o racismo, a misoginia, a homofobia, e isso é naturalizado, é visto como é só uma piada. Mas isso é resultado dessa sociedade totalmente racista, que se negou a enfrentar esse racismo, inclusive a nomeá-lo durante muito tempo, e se não fosse fruto dos movimentos negros, dos intelectuais negros, para pressionar para que, de fato, a gente pudesse discutir esses temas no debate público, essa situação seria ainda muito mais complexa. Eu acho que é fundamental aproveitar que a gente está falando com um público também internacional, de romper com essa ideia desse país harmonioso, esse país cordial. Na verdade, o Brasil é um país extremamente violento para com a população negra, e é só a gente olhar as estatísticas, olhar os dados, mulheres negras são a base da pirâmide social nesse país, e é necessário que a gente faça, de fato, um debate aprofundado sobre essa questão no Brasil. Racismo, ao contrário do que o senso comum pensa, não é algo de pessoas ignorantes, foram pensadas essas teorias racistas por uma elite econômica e continua sendo validada por essa elite econômica, e olhando para essa questão especificamente das redes sociais, não é à toa que a população negra em geral e mulheres negras em particular sejam as maiores vítimas desse tipo de ataques, muitas vezes disfarçados de brincadeiras, essas ridicularizações que eles fazem nas redes sociais, mas também ataques, sobretudo se somos ativistas num dos países que mais mata ativistas de direitos humanos, em que há um incômodo muito grande quando enfrentamos essas narrativas coloniais e saímos desses lugares que são impostos para nós.
Tá ótimo, obrigado. Patrícia, nós já estamos encaminhando para o nosso final, infelizmente, mas queria te fazer uma última pergunta. It's about switching to English. Where does freedom of expression and hate speech start? This is a recurring theme nowadays. You talk about that in your book. Are there limits to the first? Do you agree with what Jonathan said in his last answer, without incurring in censorship?
Yes, thank you. I think maybe Jonathan and even Djamila are better equipped to answer this, but I think the example of you can't shout fire in the middle of a movie theater, or in the same way, you cannot simply create porn memes of everyone and expect people, or as Djamila just said, the right-wing activist who exposed the information about this 10-year-old girl who was raped, and she just published the information and incited people to go there in front of the hospital where she was supposed to have an abortion, and this is a legal abortion. I mean, this is not freedom of expression anywhere in the world. This is violence. So, I mean, if you're being insulted or offended, and legitimate criticism, even heated discussion, this is all free speech. But exposing information of a child, calling someone, or creating fake news and saying someone is offering sex in exchange for stories, this is not freedom of speech, and this should be these people should be held accountable, should be sued, just as Djamila is doing, and I am doing. These people have to be responsible somehow.
We are reaching the end.
Can I?
Yes, please. Jump in.
Patricia's exactly correct. There is in no country, in no context, can that be considered a reasonable idea. And I don't think any court of law, let alone the court of public opinion, would suggest that it is permissible to target and victimize a 10-year-old girl that way. That is not freedom of speech, and we shouldn't confuse ourselves. And we shouldn't allow, again, the kind of malevolent actors to confuse the conversation and suggest that that's okay. It isn't anywhere, anytime, and any platform that would publish that information, whether it's, again, a social media company or a print outlet or a radio station, they should be liable for spewing those kinds of poisons into the atmosphere. Just like if a company poisoned your drink, they would be liable. If a company sold you a car with defective seatbelts, they would be liable. So it should be the same here.
Thank you, Jonathan. If everybody, I would ask for a 1 minute last words. We'll start with Patricia, just to conclude our session. Your final remarks, please.
Well, I wanted to thank for the opportunity and for the opportunity to listening to Jonathan and to Djamila about the way minorities and minority religions and gender minorities and racial minorities, they are being targeted much more often, and that there's no, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but that there's no accountability. I mean, it's the same thing. If you work for a TV or a newspaper and you're slandering someone or you're just disseminating hate speech, you're going to be held accountable. So that should happen with internet platforms. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. Djamila, você gostaria de fazer suas palavras finais?
So now I speak English. I was speaking Portuguese because yes, I think it's important to the Brazilian audience. I'd like to thank you the opportunity. I think it was very important to listen to Patrícia, to Jonathan. Jonathan was very inspirational, your speech, what you said. And yesterday I was talking with Luiz Valério Trindade, who is this professor who wrote this thesis about hate speech in internet in Brazil. And he was telling me how this company, they put themselves as technology company, not as media company. That's why it's so difficult to make them understand the responsibility of people rights in these platforms. So it was very important to me to be here tonight. I think it's a very important discussion. I think people need to understand the difference between free speech and hate speech. Needs to understand that to disagree is important, is good for democracy. We need to learn how to disagree without attacking people, without make fun of people, without treat the other person as a person that you need to end, that you needed to treat as an enemy. And I think due to this political environment that we're facing here in Brazil today, it's very difficult to have health conversations in the internet. So that's why I am doing what I'm doing here against Twitter. And for me, it was very important to be part of this conversation tonight, because I think for the Brazilian audience, it's important to understand how it's a very, very fundamental debate. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for being with us. Jonathan?
Well, I want to thank you, Fernando, and Conib for hosting us here tonight. I want to thank Patrícia and Djamila for their bravery and their courage and their truth. It's humbling for me to be with them. And I want to really thank your audience for giving us the opportunity to share our point of view. Look, I think hate is not a new phenomenon. Anti-Semitism, as I said, has been part of the human condition for thousands of years. Racism has been, at the core of so much of the Americas in our own history. This country, the United States, where I live today, built on the backs of slaves. And Djamila alluded to the Afro experience in Brazil, which is again at the foundation of the country. Racism is rampant, but what's new? Racism, anti-Semitism, not new. What's new is how social media has allowed these diseases to spread far more so than COVID-19, to travel far more quickly than any pandemic, and that is having as damaging an impact, degrading our institutions, defiling our society, and ultimately undermining us all. So just as we've asked, civilians and institutions, government and business to come together in response to the novel coronavirus, to push back on this pandemic and ask people to behave differently, so we should ask the same of the social media companies, to commit to a new set of behaviors that start with respect for their users, that demonstrate a commitment to equality and to the dignity of all people, and that once and for all, again, deny disinformation, misinformation, and hate the opportunity to take root on their systems. They owe that not just to their shareholders, they owe that not just to stakeholders, they owe that to all of society. And ultimately, I think, to our children and our grandchildren. So again, Fernando, thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight, and thank you to everyone again for listening.
I'd like to thank you, the three of you, for sharing this moment on behalf of Conib and IBI, to have ADL, to have Djamila, and to have Patricia. I would like to remember that last November I was in New York for the ADL meeting, and I was part of a table who was a session debating anti-Semitism in many countries, and I had the opportunity of listening to Sacha Baron Cohen's speech, which is something moving. I don't know if all of you have listened to that, and if you haven't, I invite the audience to go to the internet and find it. Sacha Baron Cohen, ADL. He was honored with a prize for courage that he showed. And then almost 1 year ago, he made a strong criticism to Facebook. He said that if Facebook existed in the 30s, they would probably accept to publish Hitler's propaganda in their platform. I think Jonathan remembers that. So Patricia wrote in her book, she drew a parallel between the force of radio during the Nazi period in the 1930s and the social media power nowadays. So I think we leave from this session more enabled, more knowledgeable about what is happening in Brazil, in US, in other countries. And I think we can take that with us, sharing the knowledge of the Stop Hatred Profit campaigns and trying to spread it to our country and to many other countries, because this is a fight for humanity. Thank you very much, and good night. Bye-bye.